Listen up. There's no more excuses. We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation.
Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today we've got a real treat. Mr. Pat Miller is in the house. Pat is the Idea Coach. He's a syndicated radio host, TEDx speaker, and the founder of the Idea Collective Small Business Incubator. His mission is to bring small business owners together on air, online, and in person. His business mission can be summarized by the group's tagline, "Don't grow it alone." Pat, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Dustin. Great to see you guys.
Likewise.
Glad to have you.
We are excited to have you. I like to kick off the show by asking our guest a little bit more about their journey and how they got to where they are now.
Well, it wasn't this. I was doing something completely different, to use Monty Python language. I was on the air in radio for 22 different years. I went from the center of Illinois to the center of Iowa to Nebraska, all the way here to Milwaukee, where I'm at now, and did every imaginable day part. Morning shows, afternoon shows, programming stations, picking the music, coaching the talent, making the partnership deals with the Packers and Brewers and Bucks and State Fair and all that. So it was all broadcasting all the time until 5 years ago. And those of you that used to be in corporate will probably understand the thing that woke me up one day is that I realized I was building somebody else's dream. And I thought to myself, that's not it, because I was dissatisfied for a long time and I really couldn't articulate it. And then it hit me. So I chose to leave the broadcasting industry, which is really rare because usually you're invited to leave the broadcasting industry because people just get fired left and right. But I made the choice, left 5 years ago, and then started working with small business owners. The pandemic happened, and I went on Zoom and started consulting with small business owners by doing a daily live show. That turned into the online community, and now 3 years later, here we are.
Pat, from the time you identified what it was that made you unhappy to the time you started taking action, how long was that?
Oh, it would be so great if I said I had that idea one day and I quit the next. I think my dissatisfaction with the broadcast industry, and this isn't industry specific, but my dissatisfaction was many years, 8-10 years, because in the broadcasting industry, and this might be, in other industries too, I don't know, but in the broadcasting industry, they encourage you to do things the way other people do them. They want you to perform like they do in Chicago, like they do in New York, with the assumption that, well, they're in bigger markets. They must know more than we do. So don't take chances. Don't do new things. Don't follow your curiosity. Because I like making new things. And I was discouraged from doing that sometimes. So that made me pretty frustrated. So I'd say 5 years to be safe. And maybe it was more than that.
So what was it? What was that idea where you said, not only that I'm an entrepreneur, but you're like, I need to be like let out of this box, because that's how an entrepreneur thinks. We've got ideas. We want to break the mold. We don't like the status quo. What was that first thing that you just wanted to get out and on your own and do? Was it the incubator?
No, the incubator happened totally by accident, and coming out to be a small business owner happened totally by accident. I was frustrated in the industry. I was floating new ideas that were getting turned down. And then I went networking with my wife, who's a small business owner. And I went to the local chamber of commerce and I talked to all these really smart entrepreneurial people. And I thought, oh, I can help these people based on the things that I had learned in the broadcasting industry. And as soon as that clicked and I realized there might be a life for me outside of broadcasting, that's when I got the idea to leave the industry and go start my own thing.
When you say you can help them, what specifically did you say that there's a theme here and these people need X, Y, or Z?
To me, it was pretty clear. Most of the entrepreneurs that I was talking to then and still today target too many people and offer too many products. And when you do everything for everyone, you're nothing for no one. And when I started having these conversations, how do you become a leader in your space? How do you beat everyone else? How do you do your thing differently? And many of them, no disrespect, but many of them said, boy, I don't know. I don't want to lose any opportunity to serve people. So when I heard that over and over, because in the broadcasting industry, you're targeting one gender in a 10-year age range. You know, if my wife and I both like the same station, that's bad on the station. That's not supposed to be the case. So when you live a life of hyper-targeting in broadcast and you go talk to a small business owner that's trying to make it, but they aren't targeting at all, that's when I started to connect the dots and think, wait a minute, maybe there's something I could offer to the small business space.
I think it's interesting when you we talk a lot about leadership and what's a good leader versus not a good leader. How often we hear this story, like you said, of innovative ideas not being fostered. And it always blows my mind. The kind of the big market complex is a thing that, you know, you see in so many different businesses where it's like, well, it's a profit from another land. It's like, well, why? Like what, especially in today's world, right? Like, you know, I understand maybe 100 years ago when, you know, there was just a lot more people in a city and that's how a lot of knowledge got shared, was belly to belly. But in today's world, I just feel like that's just so outdated. And then, you know, this kind of crushing of the innovation. So, you know, as you're working with smaller businesses, right? Because ultimately smaller businesses start with some innovative idea. But they tend to, you know, like you did, they have to pivot. You know, most small businesses have to pivot, and sometimes it's pivoting to their success. Sometimes it's pivoting to maybe not their success next, but, you know, so as you work with smaller businesses, I mean, how do you talk through, or what have you seen with them to kind of coach them through kind of that similar mentality you had of not just taking the leap, but then taking the leap and pivoting to basically where you can create the most value?
If we're tweaking, like I do this thing and I just need to change the camera angle a little bit, we're pivoting because something's not working. Maybe an assumption that we had wasn't accurate, or a new piece of information is given to us so we can do it a better or different way. That's fine. That happens to all of us. Like you say, we all pivot at one point or another. But if we are at business, emotional bankruptcy, I have a business, I don't like it anymore. What I like to do is go completely back to the beginning and say, okay, forget what you're doing. Forget even your skill sets. What about what you do lights you up? If you were rich and could do anything, what would you do? Everyone's got an answer for that. Great. So how can we apply that through the products and skills that you have to offer? And when you strip away what turns out to be burden, it can feel like chains sometimes, these things that you add onto the business because you think that's what you need to do. When you relieve someone of all that pressure, suddenly they can see clearly and, oh, maybe I should do it this way. So I always like to take people back to that passion and drive that they have to be on the planet, because for many of us, we're solopreneurs. We are the business. And the biggest threat, besides running out of money, which is the biggest threat, an equally large threat is losing the passion for what we're doing and burning out, because you're the only one doing the thing. So if you're performing a business, even if it's winning, but you hate it, you're on the clock already. So that's how I like to go about it when people are really struggling with the business and what they should do next.
Isn't that almost inevitable, though, Pat, that they're going to find that point in life where they run into emotional bankruptcy, as you say? And I love that term, by the way. But I don't care how strategic you are, how successful you are, there's going to be burnout, because as much as this is fun, there are a lot of highs and lows, and there are a lot of things that'll challenge you mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that all happens in one day where I'm having a great time at lunch and by 5 o'clock, I'm the dumbest guy on the planet. Yeah. Happens all the time. And sometimes that happens. And this is the most sinister part of growing your own business. Sometimes that happens because you're doing well. You grow the business to a point where you don't love it anymore, or you grow the business to a point where you're doing the fulfillment of your passion, but not your passion. So yeah, sinister, I think that's a word you used. It's absolutely true because it is very slippery to stay in your zone of genius. And one last thing, because we're all entrepreneurs, we're never really satisfied. So we're coming from a place of more, and sometimes more will inject more variables that could upset the balance of what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing about entrepreneurship is when I'm asked this question a lot on podcasts, people say, what's your 5-year plan? And I said, I try not to think more than really a year out because what I thought I wanted 10 years ago, I've mostly achieved. And if you were to ask me that question, it's like, well, this business that I built, I'm not really interested anymore because my life has changed. I'm older, I've got different priorities, different goals, different wants. And it's kind of a nuance, a nuisance for me. And so I think focus on the immediate future, because if you zoom out too far, what you want and what's happening in your life could be totally different. So I just think it's so important to stay in the present, stay in the now.
Yeah, totally agree. And you're right. Everything's going to change as time moves forward, and you still have to show up and be yourself to perform it, especially when you're a solopreneur, no doubt.
Yeah.
So Pat, as you've kind of gone off on your own, are there certain disciplines that you've changed now, getting out of broadcasting to being a solopreneur, that has helped you accelerate your success?
I always was somewhat organized, so that's good. And I've always liked to perform and bring people together. That's just part of, I guess, being a broadcaster. The thing that I had to do was I had to bring in some support behind me. I've been very fortunate to bring in some contractors and VAs who love the thing that I hate, and that is the detail work. Yes, I'm organized, but I detest the detail work. But having a team of people around me that are way better at that than I am to keep everything moving and running on time, that's the thing I had to adjust to. And maybe this rings true with you. I had to be okay with them making judgment calls and decisions and not doing it the way I would have. That overall, we're all going to get there at the same time. Just do what you need to do to get it all done. Because the thing that I do know is I don't want to do the details because I'm the worst when it comes to the details.
It's interesting when we talk about like working smarter, not just harder, right? And that's a very common thing of successful people. But one of the things we talk about is kind of you do you, right? The idea is we're all uniquely you, and finding those things that you are very good at. I would say I'm not even quite to your level. I would say like I am probably one of the most disorganized people by nature. I think if you talk to most people around me, they wouldn't necessarily say that. And part of it is because I've just disciplined the crap out of myself to try to get a little bit organized. But frankly, I've learned now that what it really comes down to is I have to have people around me that are far more organized. And then to your point, I can do the things that I'm best at it, which is not organization. But that's okay. That's not a negative to me. That's just understanding what are the things that are your unique strengths. And, to your point, the people that are working with you, they're doing it probably because they love that stuff. They love getting through the things and keeping things organized and checking the box and getting the things done and it's perfect. It's a perfect example of a team, right? We're all supporting each other because we're all doing what we do best.
Well, and that was the big change from corporate to here. I would walk down the hall, sales department, HR, billing, collections, leadership, creative. Well, now it's billing, HR, leadership, creative, like it's all on me. And if I'm going to try and do all that stuff, I got to get rid of all the stuff that I know that I'm terrible at to make sure it all gets done.
Yeah. Well, and it changes your energy day in and day out too, right? Because it allows, you can do those things, but if their energy sucks as opposed to energy gains. And I think a lot of times people forget about that. It's like, well, yeah, you could do it. I'll never forget when I was much younger and I wasn't necessarily making a whole lot of money at the time, but I hired somebody to mow my lawn. And I remember some peers of mine at the time, they're like, what? You can't set aside an hour a week to go mow your lawn? I'm like, well, I could, but I hate doing it. I'm not good at doing it. And I can hire somebody to go do it. And then I literally enjoy my job enough where I will, it's not like I'm going to be sitting on the couch during that hour. Like I'm actually going to be, I was in sales at the time, right? So I'm like, I'm going to be growing my business at the time. That's more exciting to me. But, I think a lot of times they're hesitant to do that outsource because there's that pride of, well, I need to do everything. And there's a reality that in today's world in particular, it is so easy to find people that are super good at something that you may never be good at, right? I mean, when you talk about like VAs and things like that, they have a lot of different specialties even within that, they can tackle things that I could spend the next 10 years and wouldn't be very good at.
Well, and it comes to the theme of the show. If you're good at hustling, there's no award for hustling at everything. There's something on the planet you're supposed to do, spend all 40, 60, 80, 100 hours a week doing that, and the company will go to the moon. If you're equally hustling on everything, you're dead meat.
Exactly right.
That's a message a lot of entrepreneurs need to hear again and again and again. I think it's so hard. You talk about a lot of different reasons why you should outsource or hire a VA. But I think if you're looking to prevent burnout or more burnout, because we all go through it in varying degrees, I would say that's maybe one of the first things you should consider when you start to generate some revenue and some profitability is take some things off your plate so that you can focus on the big thing. Dustin and I talk about this so often as we're creating a new product, which is, what are the 2-3 biggest things that you need your big priorities every day that you need to get off your list? I mean, just imagine if you can get to those sooner and you can do more and more and more of the big things that create the big revenue.
Yeah, that is definitely the way to do it. Traditionally, I've heard advice of take any extra money you have and just throw it into marketing. Keep on feeding the top of the funnel, accelerate the business through more and more and more leads and funnel acquisition. And that's great for velocity. But to your point, the worst thing that could happen if you don't have a good back end is a ton of customers because you'll just poof, you're just done if you don't have the machine built. So I think you're right. We got to balance that a little bit.
So let's talk about that a little more. You're essentially in marketing with broadcasting and podcasting and a lot of what you do. I find so often that whether it's business specific or marketing specific, and I'm not kidding, I'm going to say 95% of the people I talk to do not have a strategy of any kind, at least in a document format. And if it's not in document format, obviously it doesn't count. So how important is that? I mean, you talk about building the foundation. Strategy is, to me, is the foundation. How many of your clients and how many of the people you see are not strategically focused?
I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, so I'll talk about me. Not as focused as I should be. And in general, the people that I see, I would agree with you. They're not as focused as they should be either. We think a lot of activity is good and not all activity is good. The right activity is good. So when you talk about how to grow the business through marketing, a lot of us, and sometimes me included, we're just out here throwing darts, hoping that someone will respond to it. And that's why we need people like you and people that do what you do, which is to help us come in and say, what's the outcome? Great. Let's build the roadmap to get to the outcome. It's something that everyone should have. Piece of paper that shows the treasure map. Here's how we get there. And you're right. Not everybody has one, and they should.
Yeah. And when I hear you say, I want to spend some money on ad dollars or marketing, that's music to my ears. But I've seen so many businesses over the years that will finally get to that point. They say, hey, we've got 10 grand. We want to run some Google ads. And they start doing it and they say, well, it didn't work. And, the answer is always, it does work. And it works really, really well, especially with 10 grand. But the problem is you're not strategic. You're not driving traffic to a specific landing page. And even though that landing page is there, it's not very good. And so, like you said, I think building the machine is so important. Is that something you help your clients with?
Not very often. That's outside of my wheelhouse. The machine, assembling funnels, advertising to conversion, I leave that to the experts. What I normally help people with is positioning and also idea generation, challenging them when they're not thinking about the right things. So I stay out of the funnel business because I know enough to know that that is not my wheelhouse.
Well, let's talk about your wheelhouse specifically, because positioning is very important, and so is ideation. Sure. What does that look like with you and your clients?
It's tough to describe, I guess, when you're on the inside of the jar. what it really comes down to is helping them find clarity with the outcome that they're trying to find. So whenever I walk someone through an ideation session inside the community, we call them idea slams, and they're group events where we bring people together. And sidebar, most people get more out of the idea slams when they're not the subject, when they're the participant. And people say, I like to come to them, but not because I need ideas, because I like to be around the energy. So it's helpful. Yeah. But when I'm working with someone, I like to find clarity in what the outcome is. And like I mentioned before, we're working backwards on that. And what I find is that usually there's some big assumption that they've made, or there's some big roadblock that they've put up that really doesn't need to be there. That when you strip those things away, they can see the horizon again. And they're like, I guess I don't need to do that. I didn't realize that I was limiting my growth, or I was thinking about it the wrong way. So once you do that, then it's just a good old-fashioned brainstorming session, helping them figure out, okay, now that we know where we're going to get to and how we're going to get there, let's just come up with some ideas to help them get there. I wish I could share with you that I've got this 10-point plan of what I walk people through in an idea session. I don't, but that's broad strokes. How I go about doing it is helping them figure out what the success looks like, challenging their assumptions. And then once we have a more defined objective, then we go through and we try and solve it.
Pat, how many of those roadblocks are invisible?
Oh boy.
I mean, they're not really there. It's just we see something that doesn't exist.
I would say the vast majority of them. The biggest thing that holds us all back would be the stories that we tell ourselves, not the actual business conditions and the challenges that we have.
I think that, Pat, that's the nugget right there. I mean, it's amazing on how much we lie to ourselves without knowing it. And the thing that really resonated for me when you were talking about the community and not being the subject is where they gain so much of it. We went through with our sales team actually recently. We were doing like a kind of a mind mapping on different deals that they had going on. And it's amazing when it was their own deal, they just had brain fog.
Yeah.
Right. And they had, to your point, they were making assumptions. But when they were talking about their peers deal, they're like, well, you don't even have a deal. You're not talking to the right person. They don't see value in it. Like, but when it was their own, they're like, oh no, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And then their peers would have more clear vision. And I think it's that power of community that you talked about. I can only imagine that in that ideation stage of how many times that light bulb has to go on for those people. Again, even if they're not the subject, just to say, wait, am I doing this too?
Yeah.
I've got that lens.
Yeah. And it's seeing others' objectives or obstacles with clear perspective. Like you mentioned, the salespeople could see each other's obstacles, but it's also objectively looking at the person. And it happens all the time. Someone will come into an idea slam. I'm having a problem with X. And everyone kind of looks at each other and they're like, you're Chris. You don't have a problem with that. What are you doing? Like they think sometimes their greatest gift is somehow a detriment, or they realize that they've got this fastball that they're just not throwing. It's like, go throw the fastball. You're perfectly capable of this. So to your point, it's those stories in our head that stop us from taking action and going where we need to go. And I don't know why we do that. I'm sure there are mindset coaches and smart people that can answer that for you, but it's definitely something I see all the time.
Yeah.
Pat, the other thing that I think also holds people back, maybe it's both, maybe it's one or the other, but so often when I ask my clients, what's your vision? And they'll just blurt things out like, oh, more downloads, more subscribers. I guess I want more sales, all the random stuff that you could imagine. I just find that so many entrepreneurs and small businesses cannot articulate in fewer words what exactly it is they want to accomplish. Now, let's just take away all those things that are obvious, more awareness, more sales, blah, blah, blah. Can you really crystallize it down to one or two things in a sentence? I just find so many people can't. Is that part of this problem?
I think it's part of the problem. And I think it's because small business is a lifestyle, not a job. That's where it gets really foggy, because the first goal for any solopreneur or small business owner is not downloads or KPIs. It's feeding the family. It's keeping the lights on. It's feeling fulfilled. Because there's no reason for us to take all of this risk, sign our house over to the bank, go hire people, go out and try and introduce a new product, when I could just go get a job at one of the big buildings downtown and make the same amount of money or sometimes more and work way less. There's like this disconnect between what it takes to make it happen and what we get out of it. So if we're going to take that risk, we owe it to ourselves to make it fulfilling, to make it rewarding, to make it a dream come true. And then, like you're saying, run through those business objectives and have a crystallized measurement of success. But some of those early indicators, I can feed the family, I love what I'm doing, I can keep the lights on, those don't get talked about very often. Those are the kinds of conversations that I like to have because my Idea Collective community and the reason why I'm here, I'm not a coach of anything other than helping people think and come up with a different way of looking at things and creating ideas. You'll have business coaches on. You do that all the time. You've got smart people that can come on and do the fixing. I'm here to honor the commitment and the lifestyle and help people make their dreams come true. And sometimes that's not business advice that they need. Sometimes that's perspective and knowing that they're on the right path. And that feedback only comes from other people on the journey, because your corporate employee friends or your spouse that works at corporate or your parents, they don't know what it's like to be a small business owner. Only other small business owners can give that perspective.
You're right. I think so often, Dustin and I talk about this, whether, especially if you're an executive at a publicly traded company or a big corporation, or you're an entrepreneur, if you don't have a lot of people like you in your circle, it can be a very lonely place. And obviously for executives, it tends to be. And for entrepreneurs, because my spouse, she's amazing, very supportive, but she does not get it. She doesn't have an entrepreneurial bone in her body. And that's okay, right? There's yin and yang can be very good, but it's hard sometimes. I don't have a lot of serial entrepreneurs in my circle. And so people like ask you, why are you starting this? Well, why would you want to do that? There's so much competition here. And it's not that they don't believe in you. They're just curious because they don't think like you. And I get what you said before. You said people want to be in these, what'd you call them, jams?
The idea slam, yeah.
Slam, jam, close enough.
Slam, jam, flim, flam, whatever. It's all good.
Yeah, they like the energy. And of course, I want to be around like-minded people who are driven to succeed. So that makes so much sense. And I definitely think there's a need and a big need for something like that. That's why I'm sure you've seen continued growth year over year.
Yes, we're growing, but it's tough to communicate. It's tough to communicate for a couple reasons. When you go out to a business environment and say, we are a peer group for small business owners because running a small business is lonely and hard, don't grow it alone. There are people that gravitate to that. There are people that don't. They don't want to spend a dime on anything that isn't going to drive a KPI, and good for them. But my message comes from your entrepreneurial gas tank will run dry if you don't have a team around you, if you don't have supporters with you, and the only people that understand are others on the journey. Still, it's incredibly difficult to communicate. So, just being transparent here, I'm still workshopping it and trying to make sure that it's as sharp and as clear as it can be. Because what I do know, everyone needs a group like this at some point during the month or year. And the ones that don't have people like that around them, they're the ones whose ship hits the rocks. They're the ones that burn out. And I don't want that for anybody, because if they're willing to take the risk, they deserve to be honored and supported.
It's incredible in today, in hustle, the L in hustle for us is learn from others. And one of the things is really learning from other peers, right? In these communities. And in my career, I've probably been part of, dozens of groups of different peers, different cross sections and things like that. And one of the things I've often learned is so often, certainly there are some groups that are good to be part of, some groups that are not. A lot of times what I found is right before I'm supposed to join that group for that day, right? So I've signed up for it, I've committed to it, I want to do it. That day, that morning, I'm like, I don't have time for this. I don't have time for it, right? Like I got 1,700 things to do. I've got to, to your point, I've got to drive to the number. I've got to drive to the metric. I got these things piling on my plate. There's no agenda. I don't know what I'm going to get out of it. I'm not going to spend the next hour, 2 hours, walking through this. And I tell you what, 99 times out of 100, when I just freaking show up, I walk out of it like, man, that was incredible.
Yeah.
I used an example. This was a year and a half ago. We acquired a company, and like 5 months prior to that, I had one of these sessions, and it was with peers of mine, but their organizations were a little bit smaller than ours, and they were not, M&A firms at all or anything like that. And I was talking to one of them, and he's like, "Well, what do you got going?" I'm like, "Well, we're looking at potentially making this acquisition or whatever." And he's like, "Well, how do you feel about it?" I'm like, "I'm a little nervous just about the execution and making sure we got all our ducks in order and everything." And he's like, basically like a relative of his does a ton of M&A and had like basically step by step, like how to integrate from IT, HR, like all this. He's like, "I got this whole thing." He's like, it's daunting. He's like, "It's like 6 pages long." He's like, "But I'll send it over to you." And I'm like, "Yes, that would be amazing."
Thank you.
Obviously we had to tweak it for our own industry and things like that, but that was literally the starting point of our action plan to make this really significant acquisition that we made.
Mm-hmm.
And if I would have missed that meeting, I would have never had it. Right. And it's like those types of things where I think a lot of times in the hunt for being efficient, we miss the things that are right up in front of us. To your point, like, don't grow it alone. I love that saying, by the way.
Thank you.
Because everyone thinks they need to do it all by themselves. And the reality is there's other people fighting the same fight. And so go learn from each other.
To back that up, the only way that small business owners normally get together is networking. But networking is not a team sport. Networking is an acquisition exercise. Yes, you'll meet people. "Oh, it's great to see you again, Dustin. Thanks for taking the time. Oh, how are the kids?" Whatever. But you're not there to ask them for help. You're there for the fit between my business or people that you know. So when we put all of our energy into the networking side, but none of our energy into the relationship building and support side, because imagine if I saw you at a networking event saying, "Hey, could we sit down for 30 minutes and work on my business together?" You'd be like, "Get out of here. I'm here trying to make it, this is networking. This isn't work." So all of our energy goes there. But when people get together in these creative environments in a supportive community, they get validation and they get confidence, and they hear from others that are winning. It's almost like hard skills. I've never said it this way. It's like hard skills and soft skills almost. There's reasons to get together with people to grow the business, but then there are reasons to get together with people to keep the business going.
Mm-hmm.
Different kind of thing, I guess.
Absolutely.
Dustin, you make an interesting point about going to these different things. I've found the same thing, but I always try to go into them without false expectations. And what I mean by that is you don't know what you don't know. If you've never been to one of these events before and you don't know who's going to be there, I try not to get myself too high or too low, because I generally, and especially when I was younger, I'd go in thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to get so much business. I'm going to get so many leads if I just go to this thing." And then you spend a bunch of money and you're left disappointed. And so I think the best way to go about it is the mentality, which is, I'm going to go there, try to be present. I'm going to try to engage, put forth a great foot without, trying to sell, like give your business card to everybody and then leave. And that is when typically, just like your experiences, you're like, "Whoa, I made some pretty cool relationships and had some great conversations. And if something great comes from it, great." But I try not to go in there thinking I'm going to get, right? I try to go in with the mentality, I'm going to give. And then hopefully, there's some reciprocation down the road at some point. But I don't ever try to set the expectation too high for those reasons. But I've been around the block a few times. Been to a few rodeos.
And Pat, when you talk about kind of the networking versus community, it's interesting. What I've seen in call it the supportive community, right? The peer community. You can call each other out. if you're walking up to somebody and networking, you're not going to be like, what are you talking about? What, to your point, but this is Chris, like you're Chris, like what, you wouldn't, that's hard to say unless you have a very specific relationship if you're walking into a networking thing. But, I've seen that with a lot of different groups that I've been a part of where, again, the story you're telling yourself, you're saying, well, this is all I can be, or this is what this is what the ceiling is and things like that. I had one guy I came across, this was a couple of years ago, and I was kind of talking about McClone Insurance, and which is kind of my day job, right? And where I thought we could take it. And he's like, "What? Why are you putting a ceiling on it already?" I'm like, "I'm not putting a ceiling on it." Like, I was almost offended, right?
Hey.
But it was because it was in that environment. He's like, "Yes, you are. You absolutely listen to yourself. You absolutely are. Like, and you have to think differently." But it, again, in a networking environment, nobody's going to say that, right? Nobody's going to have that kind of dialogue. But to me, that's what's always been super, kind of cut through the BS conversation that can happen.
Yeah. Always valuable when someone's willing to give you that kind of direct feedback to blow away the clouds and let you see everything clearly again. No doubt. Totally agree.
You bet.
Would you say, though, that is part of the problem for some entrepreneurs is when you're talking to people, you go to loved ones, you go to family, close friends, and you'll ask them feedback. And instead of maybe giving you some of the truth, they say, "Oh, yeah, great idea. Yeah, sure, whatever." And I don't know that we're often given the truth as much as we need that. And it sounds like in a lot of your coaching and a lot of your programs that you're able to help them see the truth and help them see some clarity.
I think we see clarity and truth when we see it ourselves. If we can reflect it back to them and then they notice it, then there's a chance for them to see it. But even if a family or friend were to give you that unvarnished truth, or even a colleague gave you the unvarnished truth, you may not hear it or appreciate it if you're not ready to receive it. So if you can illustrate it to someone and they go, I get it. That's the only way you're going to get through to them. So yeah, truth is a fantastic gift to give to somebody, whether or not they're going to receive it. I'm sure you've both run into that as well. You try and help somebody out. They're like, yeah. Thanks a lot. All right. Talk to you next month. That doesn't do any good at all.
I've heard some wise people say feedback is a gift. And I believe that. I think you should always be, as an entrepreneur, open to receiving that. Because in my younger years, I wasn't always, and I know a lot of people are like that. But if you really want to grow, to thrive, to evolve, which obviously change, I think that's one of those mindsets you have to switch. Would you agree?
Totally would agree with that. One of my supervisors, that was his favorite phrase. Now, Pat, feedback is a gift. And then he would proceed to rip me a new one, right? So whenever I heard that phrase, I'm like, oh no.
This is PTSD for you.
Here it comes.
Okay.
But you're absolutely right. Feedback is a gift because it can always show you a new perspective. But it's funny that you use that phrase because I'm like, oh no, here it comes. What did I do wrong?
I'll refrain from using it, whether it's in that context or not.
That's funny.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. Pat, before we wrap up the show, tell us a little bit more about the Pat Miller Show.
Yeah, that is something that we started doing earlier this year. I wanted to do content for small business owners. I wanted to get back on broadcast on the air. And I looked around and there are a million podcasts, but there are very few actual conversations on broadcast radio for small business owners. And I thought, okay, the best way to get on the air, knowing from the industry, is to do a weekend show, maybe an hour weekend show, maybe 2-hour weekend show. So we created this hour-long weekend show, creatively enough, the Pat Miller Show. And we've got it on 23 stations right now. So it's in a bunch of different markets. We're not cleared in Wisconsin yet, but I'm talking to our friends in Appleton, ironically enough, to try and get clearance in that market. So we're trying to get that on the air. But the show itself is made up of 4 8 to 10 minute conversations with things that we need to know about: how to improve our skills, how to improve our habits, how to improve our mindset, basically how to get better at the art of small business. That's the hourly weekend show. And I just started a daily show, which is an even bigger experiment for me because I looked around again and there's an explosion, as you know, in daily live streaming. Pat McAfee's show, a whole bunch of other shows are daily live streaming and going through the roof. But I didn't find any daily live streams for small business owners in the morning. So I started that 9 a.m. Central on my socials and on YouTube. It's called Small Business Mornings. And we just spend 30 to 45 minutes going through the news of the day, doing a little bit of accountability, answering a question of the day, and kind of having that coffee break with coworkers, especially if you don't have them. It's my mission to bring people together. And this is a way that I can bring people together on a daily basis. So that's a giant experiment. I probably could use some KPIs on that, Chris, if you want to hook me up. I definitely
we
could
can
use
talk
that.
after the show, Pat. No problem.
Excellent.
And what is the name of the daily show called, and where can we find both of these shows, the daily show and the podcast?
The weekly show is called The Pat Miller Show, and that's at patmillershow.com. The daily show is called Small Business Mornings, and that is on the Idea Collective YouTube channel or on my personal LinkedIn. Those are the two channels I've adopted. And sidebar, I put it out on Facebook, I put it out on Twitter, I put it out on Twitch and a couple other places. And Facebook and Twitter rejected the content. Not literally, but like didn't want to clear the content with the same enthusiasm as YouTube and LinkedIn. It was stark, the difference of the algorithm clearance between those two platforms. So I took it off Facebook. I took it off of Instagram. I took it off of Twitter. It's just clearing on YouTube and LinkedIn right now. And it's a business show. That's probably where it should be in the first place. But it's been a great experiment. 30 days, 40 days in now. And it is just a ton of fun.
It's fantastic.
Over the last couple of weeks, I've listened to the show on Spotify. And there is a lot of really good content. And I love that you just say small business show, because there's a lot of good infrastructure, just good general business practices in there that I think all the folks listening and watching can benefit from. So I appreciate you dropping that. And then, Pat, before we let you go, you've got some cool stuff going on. You've got an event. Tell us a little bit more about that.
The big event in Q4 is the Idea Collective Small Business Conference. So again, looking around at what's not happening in the market, we do a 3-day retreat style event at a 4-star resort in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, the old Playboy Club, by the way, the Grand Geneva Resort. It's very
fancy.
swanky. So we bring people to get together for a day of workshops, a day of keynotes, and a whole bunch of connection. And the day of workshops, we're talking about accountability, mindset, sales, and copywriting. And then the keynote day is big stage, famous people. Our keynote speaker this year is Marcus Lemonis from CNBC's The Prophet. He's amazing.
Yep.
A couple other great keynotes. One is Megan Riley, who created a business called Tippy Toes. It's a children's dance studio that they took from one location to an international franchise. She went on Shark Tank and turned down Mark Cuban. Like, she's got it going on. So she's going to come on and into the room and tell us about how do we scale what we're doing. And then the other keynote that I think is really cool is a gal named Hallie Brooke. And her point of view is wellness and fitness equals more money for entrepreneurs. And she has the stats to back it up. That if we spend time choosing to be active and taking care of ourselves, we will end up making more money, not less. So she's a fantastic speaker because she doesn't make us feel lousy about ourselves, that we're not working out as much as we should. She actually shows us how movement is a path to profit. So we have other speakers that are going to be there and other things. Smallbizretreat.com is the website, but it's November 9th to the 11th at the Grand Geneva Resort. This is our 3rd year doing it. And it's the highlight of the year. It's fantastic. And I will beg you both to come because I think you'd get a lot out of it.
I love it.
That sounds amazing. Thanks for sharing. And Pat, where can we find you online? If that's not enough with the podcast, the show, the event, if they want to connect with you online, where can we find you?
It's a little bit too much of me, if you ask me. The best place is probably LinkedIn because that's the center of my world. But my website for the community is ideacollectiveincubator.com. So if you go there, you can find everything that I do. That's like the home base. But LinkedIn is probably where I spend the most of my time to meet new small business owners. And if you're watching this, you're like, I'd like to get to know that guy. Awesome. I'd like to get to know you too, because I want to hear about your business and what you're doing to win.
Awesome. Pat, thank you so much for being on the show today. Awesome conversation. Can't wait to have you back again. And for all our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in, for the downloads, the streaming. We appreciate you. Until next time, peace.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. If you're serious about raising the bar in your personal and professional life and willing to go all in on your success, head over to hustleleaders.com. Here you can get access to our Hustle Productivity ebook, attend our Hustle Masterclass, or challenge yourself to the 30-day Hustle Challenge. Pairing these tools and training with the Hustle Nation podcast will help you advance to a whole new level. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.